Alright guys, so I talked about Zack Snyder in that last video. So I'm going to be talking about James Gunn in this video. Now, James Gunn has been given basically full creative control of DC Studios by Warner Brothers. He's kind of the co-lead with Peter Safran, who has worked on comic book movies in the past, I believe like the X-Men films. I believe James Gunn's brother is involved with like the stories and the scripts and all those things. So, um, Gunn has basically free reign, kinda. He can actually make these creative decisions where Zack wasn't really able to do that. I feel like Zack Snyder, he wanted to do an interpretation that was more similar to like the New 52, which is New 52 is obviously like a very modernized reboot of DC Comics. You know, the inspiration from like the suit and the other heroes that he used like Cyborg and Aquaman. I think that's very reminiscent of like the New 52. Um, and that's fine. That's his. That's kind of his interpretation, his version of the team. Whereas James Gunn, I feel like James Gunn is trying to go more towards like the Justice League of America era of the team. Um, you know, he has Hawk Girl in there, Guy Gardner, Green Lantern. I know JLA is, the comic, well, the show I grew up with, it had John Stewart, Green Lantern, which he is going to be in the Lanterns TV series. But I just feel like he's trying to go like the JLA route as far as like the comic books, as well as more of like a classic superhero type of film, with like the costumes that look traditional to the character. Obviously, like he has the red underwear, which is like the iconic thing about Superman, obviously, besides like the red cape as well. So I believe he's just being a little bit, he's just taking his creative liberties um, with this new universe and just doing what he feels like these characters should represent. Every filmmaker has their own style, whether it's Zack Snyder, James Gunn, Taika Waititi. We all know what Taika Waititi likes to do with films. Unfortunately, he is going to be directing Dread, and I don't even want to get into that. Christopher Nolan has his own style. M. Night Shyamalan has his own style. Superman felt very much like a James Gunn film if you've watched his Guardians of the Galaxy films, as well as the Suicide Squad from the previous DC universe. Um, so I feel like he's just going for like a more lighthearted and classic tone, I guess. And that's what Warner Brothers, they just wanted to like pivot away from the DCEU because Warner Brothers never had a plan long term. They were just like greenlighting these movies and they didn't really have any direction they wanted to go in. You had all these different directors, all these different story writers, you had all the different business people, and nobody was on the same page. And then they kind of got their footing a little bit with, Shazam was well received, Wonder Woman was great, Aquaman was good, grossed over $1 billion. But unfortunately, they had had so many other films. It was like convoluted to the point where it was like they wanted to pivot and just start fresh, which I don't disagree with that. I feel like you could have finished up at least a Justice League film. You could have done like a Justice League because Zack Snyder had like Justice League 2 and 3 planned out, but they didn't want to do that. At least they gave him the 70 million to do the Snyder cut, which was pretty cool. That was like his original vision. So they pivoted away and then they wanted to bring in Gunn, which I understand. Now, how they're going to bring in Blue Beetle and Peacemaker and Amanda Waller, I have no idea because this is supposed to be a reboot, right? I would just, if there's so much baggage from the previous universe, I would just hard reboot. But Gunn wants to soft reboot. Excuse me. Which I think he should just cut the baggage and just hard reboot everything instead of being like, okay, well, we're going to say these events happened, but these didn't. It's just going to be too confusing for people that like aren't following the superhero films like regularly. It's going to be way too confusing to be like, okay, wait, so is Blue Beetle from this film universe or is he from the last one? It's going to be too confusing. So I would have just started fresh, which means you have no baggage from the DCEU. You don't have to follow the continuity from the previous universe. Now, you have a little bit of wiggle room with that that new universe because you have the Flash, and as we saw with the end of the Flash movie, when he saved his mother, he kind of altered the timeline in some way. Not only was he altering time, but he was actually going into separate universes as well. We saw Nicolas Cage Superman. We saw Christopher Reeve Superman. We saw Michael Keaton Batman, for crying out loud. And then at the end, we had George Clooney Batman. And we all know that's not going to be the Batman for the new DC films. It was just a little cameo. It would have made a little bit more sense, though, had Flash been the final movie of the DCEU. They intended it to be a soft reboot of DC. But they ended on Aquaman 2 instead, where it's just like, okay, well, ending the universe with Flash and creating some type of Flashpoint event would make more sense, but they ended it with Aquaman. But anyway, that is, like I said, he has like a silver lining with the Flash because the Flash is a powerful character. He can travel between dimensions, or rather, he can travel between different timelines and different universes. So I'm just curious to see how Gunn is going to use that power and that ability to kind of explain like how the timeline has shifted with this new universe. I feel like James Gunn is taking inspiration from, as far as like the animated films. If you guys have seen the Tomorrowverse films, which are really good, I would recommend you watch those. That is, they're the films that start with Superman, Man of Tomorrow. It's got Green Lantern, Beware My Power. It's got Justice League War World. It's got those films, and then it ends with The Crisis on Infinite Earths, which I absolutely love. They did a really good job. I think James Gunn is trying to at least kind of do more of a cinematic universe, like the Tomorrowverse, the animated films. And if he does, that'd be awesome. I hope he takes notes. Those are really good films. If you guys have not watched the Tomorrowverse films, you need to watch those films. They're absolutely fantastic. And I feel like the DCEU, it was more akin to like the Flashpoint paradox, which started the New 52, those animated films, because it was very serious and it was really brutal and there was a lot of gore and it was violent in those films. If you guys ever watched Justice League Dark Apocalypse War, it is absolutely brutal. Like, this Apocalypse War was more like an apocalypse massacre. Like, all the heroes just like get savagely dismembered by Darkseid and his army. And yeah, it's pretty brutal. You gotta prepare yourself. It's rated R. But anyway, I feel like the DCEU was like, okay, boom, Flashpoint paradox. Well, not Flashpoint paradox to where like there's a war between Atlantis and Themyscira, but more like DCEU is just like the New 52, because that's basically the New 52 came about because of the Flashpoint paradox. So I feel like James Gunn is taking more inspiration from like the Tomorrowverse. It's more lighthearted, things like that. He said he used a big comic as inspiration for his DC universe, which is Superman, All-Star Superman rather, which is a very good comic book. If you guys have not read All-Star Superman, it's a really good one. I did a review on it. You should definitely check that one out. To me, it's a great Superman story. It's really good. So I feel like he's going to go in that direction and, just give us more of like an epic tale of Superman who's going to be the focus of this new universe. I feel like Superman, the first film that he just directed, is a good introduction to the universe that we're in, and I'm really excited to see where he goes with it. I feel like it's going to be more coherent because he does have that creative control. His success at Marvel certainly opened the door for DC and Warner Brothers to hire him for their studio. So personally, I like James Gunn. I'm going to support the films if I think they're good, if I think they are worth watching, if it seems comic book accurate. And, again, comic book accurate can mean, it can mean anything, right? You could talk about JLA, you could talk about Rebirth, you could talk about New 52. I mean, the absolute universe. Comic book accurate can be, it depends on who's the writer, what the vibe is. There's so many different universes. Originally, there were like 52 universes in DC, and then multiverse got involved and all that stuff. So hopefully it's short and concise as far as these films go. Hopefully they're concise and everything works well together, and then we lead up to some type of, world threat that, the full league has to form. Maybe the Justice Gang is going to do their own thing, but the league comes together. And obviously they were already planting those seeds. We got Hawk Girl, Guy Gardner, Mr. Terrific. As far as the actual league goes, I don't know who he's going to use. Are we going to see Hawkman back from the DCEU? Or is Hawk Girl just going to be on the Justice League? Because in JLA, the cartoon I watched growing up, it was Superman, Batman, Hawk Girl, Martian Manhunter, Wonder Woman, Flash, and did I say Batman already? It was those characters. So I'm just curious where he's going to go. I'm excited. I really am excited for where he's going to go with this universe. But like I said, with my reviews and everything, he's gotten himself off to a good start. Fans like it, critics like it. It's moderately successful at the box office. So I will be supporting the new DC universe. And I'm going to end this video right there. But there's something I really do want to talk about in the next video, which I'm super excited for.